The human widower walked slowly across the ruins of the colony, his boots crunching on broken stone and dust. He had lived here for years, alone, with nothing but silence and memories. His wife was gone, his child was gone, and the war had taken everything he once called family. Yet every morning he woke up, breathing, carrying the weight of loss on his shoulders. One morning, as he stepped outside to gather water, his tired eyes caught sight of something unusual. In the distance, near the edge of the abandoned settlement, there was movement. He squinted, thinking it might be scavengers or animals, but it was neither. It was a girl, not human, her skin a soft shade of blue, her hair tied roughly with strips of cloth. She was carrying a heavy brick, struggling to balance it in her arms, and then placing it carefully on top of a small wall. The widower froze. His heart beat faster. He had not seen another living soul in months, let alone an alien. She was young, maybe in her early years of adulthood by her kind's measure. Her clothes were worn, simple, patched together from scraps. She wiped sweat from her brow and picked up another brick. Again and again, she was building something, slowly, carefully, with determination that felt larger than her thin frame. He stood watching her, hidden behind a broken wall. His mind was torn. Why was she here, alone? Why would an alien girl build a house in the middle of ruins? Who had left her behind? Hours passed, and he found himself unable to look away. She lifted one brick, then another, stacking them with patience. Her small hands were cracked, her face tired, but her eyes carried a strange fire. It reminded him of someone, his wife, who once dreamed of a home filled with love, his son, who used to play with stones pretending they were castles. The widower clenched his fists. Memories hurt. They pressed on his chest until he could barely breathe. He whispered to himself, "Don't go near her. Don't get involved." But his feet did not listen. They stayed rooted to the ground, eyes fixed on the alien girl. By the time the sun began to fall, the half-finished wall was taller. The girl sat down, her arms trembling. She looked around, alert, sensing she was being watched. For a moment, her golden eyes met his from across the broken streets. He felt a jolt, as if she could see right through the shadow he was hiding in. He turned quickly, pressing his back against the wall. His chest heaved. Why was he hiding? She was just a girl, yet something inside him stirred, something he thought was dead. It was the feeling of wanting to protect, of wanting to belong. Night fell, and he returned to his shelter. But he could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, carrying bricks with fragile arms. Every time he drifted close to rest, he imagined her alone in the cold, building walls to keep out the dark. He lay awake, whispering to the empty air, "Why do I care? She is not human. She is nothing to me." But the answer echoed back in his heart. She is alive. She is fighting. And you are watching because you remember what family feels like. When the dawn came, he was already awake. His hands shook as he tied his boots. His legs carried him outside without thought. And there she was again, lifting, carrying, building. She was not just building a home. She was building hope, brick by brick. The widower stood in silence, watching her once more, and deep inside, the seed of something long buried began to stir again, a dangerous hope. The widower returned the next morning. Though he told himself he would only pass by, he carried his old canteen in one hand, pretending he was only looking for clean water, but his eyes kept drifting toward the same place, toward the alien girl. She was already there, her back bent under the weight of another brick. Her steps were slow, her arms trembling, but her resolve was iron. Brick after brick, she stacked them with care. Her hands bled where the rough stone cut her skin, yet she did not stop. The widower watched from the shade of a collapsed roof. He felt a strange pull inside, a tug at the heart that whispered of things long gone. His wife used to build gardens out of nothing but dirt and hope. His child used to laugh at the simple walls he built with scraps of wood. Now this alien girl was shaping her dream from dust and broken stone, and he could not look away. She paused once, lifting her head. Sweat glistened on her forehead. Her golden eyes swept the ruins, sharp, alert. She must have felt him there, watching. His chest tightened. He held his breath, willing himself invisible. After a moment, she looked away, too tired to search further, and returned to her task. The widower leaned against the wall, his mind a storm. Why am I here again? Why do I care, he thought. But every time he tried to turn back, his feet refused to move. He stayed, watching her strength, her stubbornness, her will to survive. Days passed like this. Every morning he returned. Every night he left. He never spoke to her, and she never approached him. Yet something unspoken grew in that silent distance. He brought no words, only his eyes. She brought no greetings, only the sound of bricks being laid one after another. One afternoon, the girl stumbled. A brick slipped from her grasp, landing hard on her foot. She gasped in pain, falling to her knees. The widower's heart lurched. His instinct screamed to rush forward, to help, to lift the brick for her. But he froze, torn by fear. What if she rejected him? What if she saw him as an enemy? He was human. She was alien. Their people had fought wars, left scars across stars. The girl pushed herself up with trembling arms. She dragged her wounded foot aside, bit her lip until blood showed, and kept building. The widower's fists clenched. Shame burned through him. He had the strength. He had the hands. Yet he stood frozen while she bled. That night he could not sleep. His mind replayed the moment of her fall, the sound of her pain. He remembered when his wife had stumbled while carrying their child. He had run to her then, with no hesitation. Why now did he hold back? Was it fear of rejection, or fear of feeling alive again? The next morning he carried a small pack. Inside were old tools he had saved, a hammer, a chisel, even a small wooden board that might help brace stones. He told himself he would not use them, only keep them close, but deep down, he knew why he brought them. When he reached the ruins, she was already at work. Her limp was obvious now, but she carried on. The wall had grown taller, the shape of a doorway forming. She lifted another brick with slow effort. Her arms shook under its weight. She set it down carefully, then leaned against the wall for breath. The widower's breath caught in his throat. He stepped forward without realizing. A single stone crumbled under his boot. The sound echoed. The girl's head shot up. Her eyes locked onto him. For the first time, there was no distance, no hiding. Golden eyes met tired human eyes across the ruin. The silence stretched. He felt his throat close. Words stuck. She stared at him, not with fear, but with guarded suspicion. He raised his empty hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon, only the pack slung across his shoulder. She narrowed her eyes, her body tense, but she did not run. She did not scream. She only stood there, breathing hard. Her gaze flicked to the wall she had built, then back to him. The widower lowered his pack to the ground. He did not step closer. He only placed it gently in the dirt and backed away. His heart thundered in his chest. She tilted her head, confusion flickering across her face. She glanced at the tools, then at him. The moment held weight, fragile and powerful. Finally, she turned away. She picked up another brick and placed it, but her eyes lingered once more on the pack. She knew he had left it for her. The widower retreated into the shadows again. His chest ached with strange warmth. He had crossed the line he swore he would never cross. He had offered, even in silence, a piece of himself. And though no words were spoken, something had shifted between them. Brick by brick, wall by wall, the house grew taller. But in the silence, something else was being built too, something that neither of them yet dared to name. The widower came again the next day, but this time his heart felt different. He had left the pack of tools for her, and though she had not spoken, though she had not even touched them in his sight, he knew she had seen his gesture. He could not stop thinking of her eyes, sharp yet filled with something more than suspicion, something that reminded him of loneliness. When he reached the ruins, he saw at once what had changed. The hammer from the pack was in her hand. She was striking a stone to shape it, her movements careful but steady. The sight froze him where he stood. She had accepted his offering, and in that silent acceptance, she had allowed a bridge to form. She did not look at him when he appeared, but she knew he was there. He felt it in the way her shoulders tensed, in the way her ears twitched at the crunch of his steps. For a long while neither spoke. The only sound was the sharp echo of stone against hammer. Finally, the widower stepped forward, his voice cracked with dryness, and used for too long. "You should wrap your hands," he said softly. The words fell into the silence like a stone into water. Her golden eyes lifted toward him, wide with surprise. She stared, her lips pressed tight. For a moment he feared she would reject him, push him away. She did not. Instead, She lowered the hammer slowly and looked down at her hands. They were raw and bleeding from days of work. She frowned at them, then looked back at him. Her voice was quiet, but firm. "Why do you watch me?" The question struck him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I don't know," he admitted. His chest tightened as old memories swelled inside. "Maybe because you remind me of something I lost." Her gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then she returned to her work, as if his answer was enough, or maybe too heavy to hold. She lifted another brick, but this time she did not refuse when he stepped closer. His hand reached out. Steady. He took the brick from her, placed it carefully into the wall. For the first time, they built together. The hours passed in silence, but it was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people carrying the same burden. When evening came, the girl finally spoke again, her voice soft. "My family is gone." She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the wall. "The war took them. I was left behind." The widower's throat tightened. The words pierced him, dragging his own memories out of the shadows. He nodded slowly. "Mine too," he whispered. His hands trembled as he adjusted a stone. "The war left me with nothing." For a moment, the ruins around them felt heavier, as if the ghosts of both families had gathered to listen. The girl set down the hammer, her shoulders slumping. She looked at the wall, then at him. "This house," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "It is all I have. If I can build it, I will not be alone." The widower looked at her, and something inside his chest cracked open. He saw not just an alien girl, not just a stranger. He saw a reflection of himself, carrying pain, building hope out of broken stone. He wanted to tell her she was not alone, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he stayed. He worked beside her until the last light faded from the sky. When she finally set down the last brick of the day, she glanced at him. Her eyes softened, not with trust yet, but with recognition. He was no longer just a shadow in the ruins. He was a man who understood. That night, when he returned to his empty shelter, he did not feel quite as empty. He sat in the dark, staring at his hands, dust and blood from the day still clinging to his skin. For the first time in years, his hands had built something not for survival, but for hope. He thought of her words, of her loneliness, and realized he had spoken more to her in one day than he had spoken to anyone since his family's death. He lay on his bed, restless. The silence of his shelter felt different now, less like a prison, more like a reminder. Tomorrow he would return, not just to watch, not just to leave tools, but to stand beside her again. The widower closed his eyes, and though sleep came slowly, his dreams were filled not with the past, but with the sight of a house rising brick by brick, and a pair of golden eyes that no longer looked at him as a stranger. The next morning, the widower rose earlier than usual. He carried a bundle of old cloths, food wrapped in paper, and the tools he had guarded for years. His steps were heavier than before, not from weakness, but from the weight of choice. He was no longer just a watcher. He was a man stepping into the space of another soul. When he reached the ruins, she was already there. The alien girl stood at the half-built wall, her hands pressing against the stones to test their strength. Her golden eyes flicked toward him when she heard his approach. For the first time, she did not tense. She only gave a small nod, then returned to her task. He placed the bundle on the ground. Opening it to reveal strips of cloth, he held one out toward her. "For your hands," he said quietly. She hesitated, staring at the fabric. Her pride was strong, but her hands were bleeding and raw. At last, she reached out and took it, wrapping the cloth around her palm with slow care. They worked side by side that day. She lifted bricks while he mixed mud from soil and water. Together they shaped something stronger. Her walls rose straighter, taller. The widower's arms ached, but the ache was different. It was not the emptiness of survival. It was the effort of purpose. As the sun burned overhead, she finally spoke again. "You build fast." Her voice was almost teasing, soft but edged with curiosity. He gave a small shrug, sweat dripping from his brow. "I had a family once," he said. "I built for them. Toys for my son, a garden for my wife." Her hand slowed, the brick hovering in the air before she set it gently into place. "War took them," she said, though it was not a question. He nodded, his jaw tight. She turned her gaze away, her lips pressed thin. War took mine too. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled with the ghosts of what they had lost. Yet in that silence, a bond deepened, not through words, but through the shared burden of grief. The widower worked harder, every strike of his hammer echoing with memories. He remembered his son's laughter, his wife's gentle hands. He felt pain, but also warmth. The girl noticed his eyes soften when he glanced at the wall, and something stirred in her chest. She was not alone in her suffering, he understood. By evening, the house stood taller, almost forming a shape that resembled shelter. The alien girl sat down on the edge of a stone, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. The widower set a small packet beside her, bread hardened with age but still edible. She looked at it, then at him. Her suspicion flickered again, but hunger was stronger. She ate slowly, cautiously. He said nothing. He only ate a piece himself to show it was safe. The sky grew darker, clouds rolling in from the horizon. A low rumble of thunder echoed across the ruins. The girl looked at the sky, her jaw tightening. Storm, she said simply. He nodded, knowing what it meant. A storm would tear at her fragile walls, and without cover, she could be swept away. They rushed to brace the structure, placing stones, pressing mud, tying boards with rope. The wind began to howl, dust rising into the air. Her hair whipped across her face as she struggled to hold a plank in place. He moved beside her, his arms wrapping around the wood, anchoring it against the wind. The storm hit with sudden fury. Rain pounded, wind screamed. The half-built home shuddered, threatening to collapse. The widower's muscles strained as he held the wall. The alien girl shouted something in her own tongue, her voice fierce against the chaos. He did not understand her words, but he understood her fight. For hours they battled the storm together, their hands raw, their bodies soaked. Yet neither gave up. They pressed stones back into place. They held beams against the raging wind. Their breaths came heavy, their bodies trembled, but they endured. When the storm finally passed, silence returned, broken only by the dripping of water. The wall still stood, battered but alive. The alien girl sank to her knees, tears mixing with rain on her face. The widower dropped beside her, his chest heaving. He looked at the house, then at her, and a strange smile tugged at the corner of his lips. She turned her golden eyes to him, seeing in that moment not a stranger, not an enemy, but a man who had fought beside her. Her lips parted, her voice trembling. "Why help me?" The widower stared at her, his throat dry. He wanted to say because he was lonely, because she reminded him of family, because he could not bear to see her fight alone. Instead, he whispered the only truth he could manage, because no one should build alone. Her gaze lingered on him, her eyes shimmering with something unspoken. She gave the smallest of nods, a fragile acknowledgement of trust. And as they sat there in the ruins, soaked and trembling, a thought grew quietly in the widower's heart. For the first time in years, he was not just surviving. He was living, and he was not alone. The storm had left its mark on the ruins. Broken branches lay scattered, puddles filled the cracks in the ground, and mud streaked across the half-built wall. Yet the house still stood, and so did they. The widower and the alien girl sat in silence that morning, tired but alive. The widower watched her as she worked again, her hands moving slower now, wrapped in cloth he had given. Every brick she placed was careful, steady, her golden eyes focused with determination. He saw not just strength in her, but something deeper, a need to belong, a fight against the emptiness he knew too well. He began to bring small things each day, food, tools, even scraps of wood. At first she hesitated to accept them, pride flashing in her eyes. But hunger and exhaustion softened her resistance. Slowly, she allowed his help, not only with gifts but with his hands too. Together they built faster, the walls rising taller with each passing day. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, the widower felt a memory stir. His son's laughter echoed faintly in his mind. He remembered how his boy once stacked wooden blocks into crooked towers, proud of every unsteady wall. His wife's voice followed in memory, gentle and warm, praising every small effort. He paused, a brick heavy in his hands. His breath caught. The pain of loss struck him hard. But for the first time, it did not crush him. Instead, it blended with something else, a faint warmth that spread through his chest as he looked at the alien girl. She struggled with a stone twice her size, her body trembling, but she did not quit. He stepped forward and lifted the stone from her hands, placing it firmly into the wall. She looked at him sharply, ready to protest, but the fight faded when she saw his face. His eyes were not pitying, they were remembering. The silence between them held more weight than words. That evening, when the day's work ended, the widower sat near the remains of a fire. He had brought wood and struck sparks until the flame grew. The girl sat across from him, her eyes reflecting the glow. She held a piece of bread he had given, eating slowly, cautiously. For a long time neither spoke. Only the crackle of fire filled the air. Finally, she said softly, "You had family." It was not a question. He nodded, staring into the fire. A wife, a son. His voice was rough. They were everything, and then they were gone. She lowered her gaze, her hands tightening around the bread. "I had parents, sisters," she whispered. "They are gone too. I built this house for them. If I live inside it, maybe they will not be forgotten." The widower's chest ached. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that the house would not bring them back, but he stopped himself, because he understood. He built too, not for survival alone, but to keep memory alive. The girl's eyes lifted to him again, shimmering in the firelight. "Why do you stay?" she asked. He looked at her, struggling for words. At last, he whispered, "Because when I watch you, I remember what it means to have hope." Her lips parted, as if to speak again, but no words came. Instead, she looked away, her hands trembling as she pulled her cloth tighter around her palms. That night, he did not return immediately to his empty shelter. He stayed by the fire until the stars lit the sky, watching her as she drifted to sleep beside the half-built wall. For the first time in years, he did not feel the crushing silence of grief pressing down on him. He felt something else, fragile but real, the beginning of belonging. When morning came, he woke to the sound of her lifting bricks again. Already working, he rose without complaint, stepping beside her. They built together as if it had always been this way, as if the ruins were no longer ruins but the foundation of something new. As the walls grew, so did the unspoken bond between them. Each shared glance, each unspoken word, wove threads between two broken souls. The widower began to see not just her struggle, but her spirit, and with each passing day, the thought he had buried deep within rose stronger. He was not only helping her build a house, he was helping build something he thought was lost forever, the shape of family. The house was no longer just a pile of stones. By now the walls stood tall, the doorway framed, and the roof slowly taking shape. Each day the widower and the alien girl worked together, and each night they rested by the fire, in silence, in glances, in the simple rhythm of shared survival. Something fragile had been built between them. But peace in the ruins was never meant to last. One morning, as the widower carried a heavy beam across the half-finished floor, he heard a sound that froze his blood. Voices, harsh and cruel, carried by the wind. He dropped the beam and motioned for the girl to stay quiet. Her golden eyes widened, sensing the danger. Shadows moved among the ruins, a group of scavengers, armed with crude weapons and hunger in their eyes. They had found the house, and in their world, anything built was something to be taken. The widower's fists clenched, his heart pounded. He had fought before. During the war, he knew what men like these would do. They would strip the walls, steal the food, maybe worse. His gaze shifted to the alien girl, who crouched low behind the unfinished wall, fear flickering across her face. The scavengers laughed as they approached, kicking over broken stones. "Someone's building here," one of them sneered. "Look at this, a house rising from the dirt," another spat. "Then we'll take it, leave nothing standing." The widower stepped forward before he could stop himself. His voice rang out, steady. "This is not yours." The scavengers turned, eyes narrowing. "And who are you to say that?" The leader mocked. He was taller, scarred, with a blade at his hip, an old man clinging to rubble. The widower stood tall, though his heart hammered in his chest. "It belongs to her," he said, nodding toward the girl. She stiffened at his words but did not move. Her golden eyes shone from the shadows. The scavengers laughed, cruel and sharp, an alien. One said, "Better we take her too. Sell her. Humans pay well for strange pets." Rage flared in the widower's chest. His body moved before his mind. His hand gripped a broken piece of wood, heavy like a club. He raised it, his voice low but firm. "You will not touch her." The scavengers spread out, circling him. The alien girl's breath caught. She wanted to rise, to fight. But her body shook with fear and exhaustion. She had only bricks and bleeding hands. But the widower stood like a wall himself, unyielding. The first scavenger lunged, swinging a rusted blade. The widower stepped aside, the wood striking hard against the man's ribs. A crack echoed. The scavenger fell with a cry. The others roared, rushing forward. The fight was chaos. Steel clashed against wood, fists slammed against bone. The widower's arms burned. His body screamed with age and grief. But he did not fall. He thought of his son, of his wife, of everything he had lost. He thought of the girl behind him, golden eyes watching, and he found strength he thought long gone. One scavenger grabbed him, dragging him to the ground. The widower gasped, the blade flashing above him. Before it could fall, a brick struck the scavenger's head. The girl had risen, her hands trembling but fierce. She hurled another stone, her voice sharp, crying out in defiance. Together they fought, he with his wood, she with her bricks. The scavengers faltered under their unexpected strength, two broken souls standing as one, fighting not for survival alone, but for something greater. At last, the leader staggered back, blood dripping from his lip. His eyes narrowed with fury, but he saw the fire in the widower's stance, the determination in the girl's golden gaze. He spat on the ground. "Not worth it." He growled. He motioned for his men, and one by one they retreated into the ruins, leaving behind curses and threats. Silence returned, broken only by the widower's heavy breaths. He dropped the wood, his arms trembling. The girl rushed to him, her hands reaching out. "You are hurt," she said. Her voice cracked with worry. He shook his head, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. "I am alive," he whispered. "We are alive." Her hands trembled as they pressed against his arm, not to heal, but to hold. For a moment their eyes locked, no longer strangers, no longer divided. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, trust forged in fire. The widower looked at the house, its walls still standing, scarred but strong. He realized then that they were the same, scarred but unbroken, building something brick by brick, even against the storm, even against the world. He turned to her, his voice quiet. "They will come again." She nodded, her golden eyes fierce. "Then we will be ready." And for the first time, the widower felt the truth of his own words. He was not protecting her alone. She was fighting beside him. Together they were not just building a house. They were building a family. Days turned into weeks, and the ruins slowly changed. The scattered stones became walls. The empty frames became shelter. What began as a lonely effort by a young alien girl had grown into something more. Two hands joined by grief, building not just a house, but a life. The widower worked with her each day, his body aching yet alive. He had not felt such purpose in years. Every brick he lifted, every wall he straightened, reminded him of who he once was, a husband, a father, a man who built for those he loved. And now, though his family was gone, he felt that same fire in his chest again. The alien girl changed too. Her golden eyes no longer carried only suspicion or fear. They softened when she looked at him. Sometimes she even smiled, faint but real. The sound of her laughter, rare and delicate, filled the broken colony like sunlight after a storm. She was no longer only building a house. She was rebuilding herself, piece by piece. Together they planted small seeds in the soil beside the house, seeds he had kept hidden in an old tin, hoping one day to use them. They worked side by side, their hands touching the earth, and when the first green shoots broke through the dirt, the girl gasped, her face glowing. It was not only a house they were building anymore. It was a home. At night they sat by the fire, sharing stories and broken words. She taught him a few of her people's phrases, harsh but melodic. He told her about his son's games, his wife's cooking, his old dreams. She listened, eyes shining, as if memorizing every word. She told him about her sisters, their songs, their laughter, her voice breaking but steady. They mourned together, and in mourning, they healed. But not all was peace. The threat of scavengers lingered, and the widower knew danger would come again. Yet he no longer felt fear the way he once did. He felt strength, Because he was no longer alone, the girl was strong too, and together they were more than the sum of their broken pieces. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fire and gold, the house finally stood complete. The walls were steady, the roof solid, the doorway framed by stone that glowed warm in the fading light. The girl stood before it, her hands trembling, her golden eyes filled with tears. She whispered something in her language, a word heavy with meaning. Then she turned to him, her voice low but clear, "Home." The widower's chest ached, his eyes burned. He looked at the house, then at her, and for the first time in years, he felt whole. The emptiness that had haunted him seemed smaller now, replaced by something he had thought was lost forever: hope. She stepped closer, her small hand reaching for his. For a heartbeat he hesitated. Then he let her fingers curl into his calloused palm. The warmth of her touch was fragile, but it spread through him like fire. "You are not alone now," she said, her voice trembling but true. His throat closed. He could not speak. He only nodded, the weight of her words sinking deep into his soul. That night, he did not return to his old shelter. Instead, he stayed by her side inside the new house. The walls smelled of stone and dust, but they also carried something new, the scent of belonging. He lay awake listening to the soft rhythm of her breath, and for the first time in years, he did not fear the silence. Morning came, and sunlight spilled across the floor of their new home. The widower rose, his body stiff but his spirit lighter. The girl was already awake, placing the first items inside: scraps of cloth for bedding, a small pot for cooking. It was little, but it was theirs. As he watched her, a quiet realization filled him. He had come here only as a broken man, a shadow of what he once was. But by helping her build, he had rebuilt himself, brick by brick, wall by wall. She had given him back what war had taken, the dream of family. He stepped outside, looking at the house standing proud against the ruins. The alien girl joined him, standing close. Her golden eyes met his, and in their reflection he saw not just a stranger, not just an alien, but the beginning of a new life. The widower whispered, his voice soft but steady, "Home." And for the first time in years, the word did not taste bitter. It tasted like hope. It tasted like family.